You know, most players in the Division Resurgence are building their characters completely wrong. Not because they're bad players, but because the game barely explains how some of its mechanics actually work. And after spending hours testing builds, changing weapons, rebuilding my scout setup, comparing cooldowns, testing talents, and honestly, making a lot of mistakes, I realized something very important. The strongest build in this game are not always the build with the biggest DPS, because behind the scene there are hidden systems affecting the damage scaling, skill uptime, proc activation, support effectiveness, and even how your weapon functions. And once you understand these mechanics, your entire build philosophy changes. So in this video, I'm gonna show you some of the biggest hidden mechanics that the Division Resurgence never properly explains. And trust me, some of these completely change how I play the game. One of the biggest mistakes players make is judging weapons only by damage per bullet. At first that sounds logical. Higher damage should mean a better weapon, right? Not always. Because some builds in this game doesn't scale from damage, they scale from hits. That changes everything. For example, I use a P90 on my scout build, and a lot of players might look at that and think, why are you using an SMG instead of a hard-hitting weapon? Simple. This build is based around proc activation, buff uptime, stack generation, engineering effects, and constant talent triggering. And all of those mechanics activate from landing hits. When you understand that, the build becomes faster RMP equals more hits equals faster stacks equals more buffs equals higher overall damage output. At that point, your weapon stops being just a gun and becomes a triggered engine. That's why high RPM weapons can become instantly strong for support builds and proc-based setups. The game never really explains that, but once you understand it, weapon evaluation completely changes. Now this next mechanic is something I think a lot of players misunderstand. Your DPS number does not always reflect your actual value. And I noticed this while testing support setups, because even when my raw stat looked average, my team damage skyrocketed once my buffs started cycling. Why? Because builds in this game scale through amplification systems, not just raw weapon damage. Things like pulse, smart cover, tactical link, vulnerability effect, engineering scaling, and support talent can multiply damage output. That's a huge difference. Because adding damage and multiplying damage are not the same thing. Two players can have similar DPS stats, but one player can massively increase the entire team's performance through buffs and amplification effects. That's why support builds are way stronger than most people realize. And honestly, I think this game explains this very poorly. A lot of players chase raw DPS numbers without realizing synergy is often stronger than stats. Now this mechanic completely changed how I build characters. Cooldown breaking points. Most players think more cooldown reduction is always better. But eventually you hit a breaking point where your skill duration becomes longer than the cooldown itself. And once that happens, you basically achieve permanent uptime. For example, my pulse lasts long enough that I can reactivate it before it expires. Same thing with his smart cover. That means my build has near constant buff uptime during combat. And once you reach that stage, cooldown reduction becomes less valuable, because now you can start investing into stronger buffs, survivability, support scaling, utility even, or combat effectiveness. This is a massive hidden mechanic, because many players keep stacking cooldown reduction without realizing they already crossed the most important threshold, and the game never explains where that breaking point actually is. Now this one surprised me a lot. Most people think support gameplay means standing in the back, healing teammates, avoiding combat, and playing passively. But after testing scout builds properly, I realized support builds in this game are designed around combat activity. A lot of support talent triggers from landing hits, maintaining stacks, staying active in combat, constantly applying pressure, meaning if you stop shooting, your build actually becomes weaker. That's why high RPM weapons work so well on support setups. The build wants aggression, It wants uptime, consistency, pressure, constant engagement. You're not supporting by hiding, you're supporting by constantly feeding your build engine. And once I realized that, the entire playstyle suddenly made sense. Now this next mechanic sounds weird at first, but it's true. Sometimes your gun is not your actual damage source. Your weapon is simply activating the system that creates the damage. Think about it. Your shots activate pulse debuffs, support debuffs, proc chains, engineering, scaling, hit-based talents, vulnerability effects. So while your weapon is technically firing, the real damage is coming from all the systems interacting together. That's why some low DPS builds outperform builds with stronger raw stats, because synergy beats isolated numbers. And honestly, that's one of the reasons I enjoy this game so much right now. The deeper you go into the systems, the more complex the build's crafting becomes. So yeah, these are some of the biggest hidden mechanics I've discovered so far in the Division Resurgence. And understanding things like RPM scaling, proc engines, damage amplifications, cooldown breaking points, and support combat loops can completely change how you build your character. And honestly, I feel like most of this stuff is barely explained inside the game itself. So if you enjoyed this video and want more deep dive build content, hidden mechanics, and advanced system breakdowns, definitely subscribe, because I'm still testing a lot more builds, and I honestly feel like we've barely scratched the surface yet. AgentHuntzman, signing out.